Welcome to Fantasy Football by Ben. Today I'm going to be talking about my wide receivers 1 through 16. I hope you enjoy. If you do, be sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe if you're new. Alright, let's get right into this. At number 1, I have Davante Adams. I think Davante Adams has a really high ceiling, and he's got a really solid floor. I think that last year was kind of what we saw from his ceiling, but what do you know? I mean, Aaron Rodgers is back. You never know how well Davante Adams is going to do. Aaron Rodgers likes targeting Davante Adams, and him and Aaron Rodgers have a connection. So I do think that Davante Adams is a really solid wide receiver, and that's why I'm at number 1. I think he's the best wide receiver in fantasy. And again, what I did with the running backs was I compared him to how Fantasy Pros has him ranked. Fantasy Pros has Davante ranked 2nd. I think Davante Adams is going to be the number 1 wide receiver. He has a high chance of repeating it again, and he only played 13 and a half games last year. And so I do think that if he plays a whole 16 games, or 17 games, because 17 games this year, I think that Davante Adams is a really solid fantasy option, and last year he proved that he can be by far a number 1 wide receiver in only 13 and a half weeks. Number 2 wide receiver I'm going to be talking about today is Tyreek Hill. I think Tyreek Hill has a really high ceiling, but he just doesn't get the volume that Davante Adams or Stefon Diggs gets, and so that's why I have him ranked 1 below Davante Adams. But if Tyreek Hill had the same volume as Davante Adams, I think that his numbers would be insane in fantasy football. And they just have so much players in that offense that they have to involve that I think that Tyreek Hill doesn't get a whole lot of volume, but I think he's still a really, really good fantasy wide receiver. And any week he can score you 30 fantasy points. So I do think that him being a number 2 isn't like a diss to Tyreek Hill, but I do think that Davante Adams is a little bit better, even though Tyreek Hill probably realistically, if he got the same amount of targets and stuff as Davante Adams gets, I think that they'd be very similar. Davante Adams might actually be a little bit better just because he scores more touchdowns, but as of right now, with a little bit less volume, I think Tyreek Hill is a little bit worse wide receiver. But Fantasy Pros has him ranked 1st, so if you would rather draft Tyreek Hill over Davante Adams, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I would personally draft Davante Adams over Tyreek Hill every time. At number 3, I have Stefon Diggs, and I do think that Stefon Diggs is pretty much clear-cut a top 3 wide receiver, whatever order you have him in, 1, 2, 3. He gets a ton of volume. He's in a great offense. He's with a great quarterback. I mean, last year he's a tight end 2 or wide receiver 3, and so I do think that overall he will probably finish around there, maybe even better, because last year he didn't score a whole ton of touchdowns, but he led the league in receptions, targets, and receiving yards. Oh, no. Yeah, I think he led in receiving yards. But that was also Davante Adams playing 13 and a half games, and Tyreek Hill didn't play the last game and didn't. I mean, they're all interchangeable, the top 3, and I do think that all of them have show that they have different values. Stefon Diggs is going to get you a bunch of catches, and he's going to get receiving yards. He's very consistent. Davante Adams can blow up any game, and same thing with Tyreek Hill. And that's where I think their value is a little bit higher than Stefon Diggs. But I do think that Stefon Diggs gives you a little bit different pieces that they don't give you. He is very consistent, and he's a really good receiver. But I do think that Tyreek Hill and Davante Adams have a little bit higher of a ceiling than Stefon Diggs. But Stefon Diggs did lead the league last year in receiving yards, so I do think that it's a very he's in a very good offense for him, and he's a really good deep threat. And Josh Allen really likes targeting him, so I do think that Stefon Diggs is definitely deserving of a top 3 wide receiver pick this year. Also, I forgot to mention that Fantasy Pros has Stefon Diggs ranked 3rd, and I also have Stefon Diggs ranked 3rd. And number 4 for me, going into this season, I have Calvin Ridley. I think that he's going to be a lot better than he was last year, and last year was the number 1 wide receiver for most of the year until Davante Adams got really hot, and Tyreek Hill had that 200 receiving yard game and 4 touchdowns or whatever it was, 3 touchdowns. And, I mean, Stefon Diggs was always in the top 5. He was very consistent, like I was saying. But I have Calvin Ridley at 4. Fantasy Pros also has Calvin Ridley at 4. I do think that Calvin Ridley, without Julio Jones, means that he's going to get double-teamed a little bit more, but his value is so good that I do think that as a receiver, he has a potential of being a top wide receiver in fantasy football. And that's where I have him ranked 4th, and so does Fantasy Pros, because of his upside potential. He's an amazing route runner, really good at getting open, creating space, and Matt Ryan targeted him more times than Julio Jones. in the 2 years that they played together. But then again, Julio Jones didn't play every game, and he was hurt, banged up a little bit. So I do think that Calvin Ridley, that helps his case a little bit more. But I do like Calvin Ridley as a receiver, and I think he's going to be a top 5 fantasy wide receiver pretty much guaranteed this year. At number 5, I have a guy that I'm pretty high on, and that's DeAndre Hopkins. I really like the stack this year with DeAndre Hopkins and Kyler Murray. And so right now I have DeAndre Hopkins at 5. I think that the year he had last year was just the beginning of what he can possibly do. And that's why I'm at number 5. I think he's pretty much guaranteed to be a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy, just like Calvin Ridley and 3 other guys ahead of him. I think they're all really high floors and really good ceiling, or really high ceilings, pretty good floors, pretty consistent floors. The thing with DeAndre Hopkins is, as long as he can stay healthy, and if they added too many weapons into this offense, that he's kind of being taken away from being the complete alpha dog, where AJ Green could get a bunch of targets this year and get a bunch of stuff, and possibly that Rondale Moore could also be doing some things like that. But I do think that DeAndre Hopkins is still clearly the alpha dog in this receiving group, and so I do think that he's still Kyler Murray's guy to go to. I have him ranked 5th. Fantasy Pros also has him ranked 5th, and I do think that he's going to have a really good year. He's getting a little bit up there in age, but I think he's going to be a really solid receiver this year in fantasy. At number 6, I have A.J. Brown. I think A.J. Brown's a really good receiver, and he's a really, really great yak guy. And last year he was playing when he was injured, and so I do think that this year's going to be a little bit different, and he probably will play more weeks than he played last year because last year he was hurt. And he ended up finishing in points per game as like the wide receiver 6. And so I do think that A.J. Brown could be really, really solid in fantasy this year again. And right now I have him at number 6. Fantasy Pros has him at number 7. I am a huge fan of A.J. Brown. I think that he's going to be a really good receiver this year. And I know they added Julio Jones in that offense, and they're still a very run-heavy offense, but I do think that A.J. Brown, even with like 110 targets, 120 targets, is a better fantasy receiver than a lot of the guys below him. And I think his ceiling is super high. He scores a lot of touchdowns. He doesn't catch a whole lot of passes. He's kind of like a Tyreek Hill almost in a way, but not as good of a quarterback. But I think that A.J. Brown is still a really viable fantasy receiver, and I think he has a ceiling of being a top 4 wide receiver in fantasy football this year. At number 7, I have DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is really interesting because Russell Wilson loves the guy, and in general, the Seahawks offense uses DK Metcalf very well. And so I do think that DK Metcalf has a ceiling of just like A.J. Brown and a couple guys before him, being a top 4 wide receiver in fantasy. And obviously, as a ceiling of being top 1, he could be the number 1 wide receiver, just like the other guys that I've named. I mean, all these guys are really, really good fantasy wide receivers. And any of them that you can get, I think, are really good. And even if they finish as the wide receiver 6, you're getting a really good value out of them this season. And so right now I have DK Metcalf at 7, but going into each week, I'll be re-ranking all of these guys and everything and who I think will be really good that week. And some weeks probably DK Metcalf will be like top 4 or top 5. And I think that if he starts off really hot and Russell Wilson keeps feeding him the ball, I think DK Metcalf could be a really good fantasy wide receiver. I have him at number 7, though, behind A.J. Brown. Fantasy Pros has him at number 6, ahead of A.J. Brown. I'm a little bit higher on A.J. Brown this year, and I think it's because he won't get double-teamed as much with Julio Jones there, and I think DK Metcalf might get double-teamed a little bit more than A.J. Brown this year. At number 8, I have a guy that's probably in the same category as DK Metcalf and A.J. Brown, and that's Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson's coming off of a phenomenal rookie year, and I think that it's just going to get a little bit better every year. Well, I mean, it's really hard to get better than what it was last year because of how the year all he had. And I think that Justin Jefferson's just a really solid receiver, and he's definitely deserving of the 8 spot in this. And Fantasy Pros also has him at number 8, and so I do think that his value is in a good spot, but his ceiling is very high, and I think his floor is also very high. So I do think that if you're getting him in the 2nd or 3rd round, really great value out of Justin Jefferson, and I have him ranked 8th. I think he could potentially get up to like the 5-6 range. And I think he's a really solid fantasy receiver, and I really trust that Kirk Cousins will get him the ball. And I don't know how good Adam Thielen will be in the red zone, because last year Adam Thielen had 13 receiving touchdowns, and Justin Jefferson wasn't as efficient in the red zone as Adam Thielen. But I think that this year they could be closer to each other on red zone efficiency. And I don't think that Adam Thielen will blow anybody or blow Justin Jefferson away in that category. And they get to the red zone quite a bit. And last year they didn't hand the ball off as much as I was thinking they would in the red zone to Dalvin Cook. And so I do think that this could be a Justin Jefferson year in the red zone. At number 9, I have a guy that's just slightly below the other 3 guys that I just named. And that's Allen Robinson. I think Allen Robinson's a really good wide receiver. I just don't know what his quarterback situation is really going to be like. And will Justin Fields get to start the year? Will he get to start halfway through the year? Will he start after week 4? We don't know. I don't know. Matt Nagy probably is the only one that realistically knows. And so I do think that if he gets Justin Fields earlier than later, I think it'll boost Allen Robinson's fantasy value up even higher. Allen Robinson's a great receiver, and he's been great with mediocre quarterbacks. And so I do think that Allen Robinson at number 9 is a very solid spot for him. He could move up. He could move down. He's got a good ceiling. He's got a good floor. I think that he's just a really solid wide receiver. And if he gets Justin Fields, I think it just makes his ceiling a little bit higher and his floor a little bit higher. And so I'm at number 9, and Fantasy Pros has him at number 10. Don't forget that their link is down below in the description if you want to look at their rankings. At number 10, I have Terry McLaurin. I'm a huge fan of Terry McLaurin. Anybody who knows me would tell you that. And I'm just going to let you know right now, I think that he has a really high potential of being a top 5 fantasy wide receiver this year. And if he's going in the 3rd round or 2nd round, late 2nd round, early 3rd round, I think it's a really solid pick. I would probably draft Jefferson, Metcalf, and Brown ahead of him. I think that Hill, Adams, Diggs, Ridley, and Hopkins are all going way before that. And Metcalf, Brown, Jefferson, Robinson, McLaurin are all around the same area. Keenan Allen. But I think I would almost pick Terry McLaurin 4th out of those guys, which the first 3 guys I named are the first 3 guys that I would do. But that's only because Allen Robinson's quarterback situation, I really don't know. And I think Ryan Fitzpatrick could have a good year, and Terry McLaurin is going to be a huge reciprocant of that. And I do think that even though they added a bunch of different weapons, they drafted a guy, they brought in Curtis Samuel, I think that Terry McLaurin is still going to have a really solid year this year. And I have him at my wide receiver 10. Fantasy Pros I'm at 9, which I thought was a little high, just because I really think that Justin Fields will start sooner or later, and that's going to help Allen Robinson, I think, a lot. And so I had Allen Robinson a little bit ahead of him, but I really do like Terry McLaurin, and anybody that knows me knows that I like Terry McLaurin. At number 11, I have Keenan Allen. I'm a huge fan of Keenan Allen, too. I think he deserves to be right in that conversation of Terry McLaurin and Allen Robinson. And with Justin Herbert last year, I mean, Keenan Allen was a top 15 wide receiver. Actually, he was top 10 wide receiver, sorry. And this year, I have him at number 11. I think that he's just going to be a really solid fantasy wide receiver. And I think that overall, he's just better than what people expect. And yeah, he's been hurt in the past, but hopefully he can stay healthy and keep doing what he did last year and for like a season-long pace. And so I do think that if he does, he's going to be, he has the potential of being top 5. That's what it comes down to. All these guys that I'm naming right now in the top 12 wide receivers has a very high potential of being a top 5 wide receiver. And I think Keenan Allen, with the volume he gets a bunch of catches, he gets all these things, and Justin Herbert's favorite target by far. And I do think that Keenan Allen will have a really good season this year, and he does have a potential of finishing top 5. I have him ranked 11th. Fantasy Pros also has him ranked 11th, so we're pretty much on the same page with him. I just think that Keenan Allen is a little bit better than of a player than the guys that I have behind him. So I do like a couple of guys behind him, probably almost as much as Keenan Allen, but I really like Keenan Allen this year, and he's going in like the 3rd round, and I think that it's a really good value if you get him in the 3rd round. especially if you have 2 running backs early already. I think that's a really good pick to pick Keenan Allen in the 3rd round. At number 12, this is where things get a little bit spicy. I have CeeDee Lamb at number 12, and Fantasy Pros has him at 13, which really isn't that big of a difference, but realistically, it is kind of a big difference. But I have CeeDee Lamb at 12. I think that his ceiling could be so high. We really don't know. We haven't seen him full season with Dak Prescott. I mean, last year, CeeDee Lamb was amazing with Dak Prescott. He was on pace for like 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns or whatever it was, or 7 touchdowns, and like 90 receptions. So I do think that CeeDee Lamb, with how much the Cowboys threw the ball last year when Dak Prescott was healthy, I think CeeDee Lamb has a really high chance of having a really high ceiling this year. And so I have been number 12. I think that he could potentially be even further up the list, but I don't know how healthy Dak Prescott is. I don't think many people really do know how healthy Dak Prescott is. But if they throw the ball as much as they did last year, I think there's a really high chance that CeeDee Lamb gets a lot of those target shares. And also Amari Cooper is banged up this year, and I think that's really going to help the Dak Prescott CeeDee Lamb. And if CeeDee Lamb gets even like 25% of target share in that offense, and they threw the ball as much as they did last year when Dak Prescott was healthy for the first 4 games, I think CeeDee Lamb is going to be on pace for a really, really, really good season this year in fantasy. And not many receivers get 25+% target share in their offenses. At number 13, I have a guy that I'm really high on this year, and that's Chris Godwin. I think Chris Godwin's going to be a really, really good wide receiver this year, and most people are kind of underrating him because last year he was hurt for a little bit. He was banged up. I do think that he is going to be really, really good this year, and last year he caught about 80% of the balls thrown to him, which is insane, and him and Tom Brady, I think, have a connection. Tom Brady really likes throwing to the slot. I mean, we saw what Julian Edelman did from like 2015 to 2019, and pretty much any other slot receiver that's ever played with Tom Brady before that has done very similar. And I think Chris Godwin potentially is the best receiver in this offense, and so I really do like Chris Godwin. But Mike Evans is also very good, and that's the next guy I'm going to talk about. He's number 14. But I think Chris Godwin's a little bit better than Mike Evans, and Tom Brady really likes throwing the slot, like I was saying. And so I do think that Chris Godwin's a little bit ahead of Mike Evans. Just Mike Evans has the touchdown upside, and that's why I have him at 13 and 14. So on Fantasy Pros, they have Evans ranked 12th and Godwin ranked 14th. I have Godwin at 13, and Evans at 14. So a little bit different there. But I do really like Chris Godwin, and a little bit more than Mike Evans. And Chris Godwin's going a little bit later than Mike Evans, so you're getting a lot of value out of Chris Godwin. He's going in like the middle of the 4th round, and so I do think you're getting a lot of value out of Chris Godwin because of the value of the pick in the 4th round, and then also the fact that Mike Evans is going a whole round earlier than him makes Chris Godwin a little bit more valuable as a receiver in fantasy, especially because I think he's going to be a little bit better, and you're getting him in a later round. I think it's just all around a good thing for your fantasy team if you draft Chris Godwin around later. And I personally think that Chris Godwin's going to be really good this year. But going on from Mike Evans, I think Mike Evans also is going to be really good. I mean, 13 and 14 wide receivers barely outside of the number 1 wide receivers in fantasy on your team. And so, I do think that they're both going to be really good. I just don't know which one's going to be truly better than the other one. I think Chris Godwin's going to be a little bit better, but it's really hard to tell. And that's why this is a preseason ranking, and I'm just taking my best guess on what I think could happen this year among those wide receivers in the Tampa Bay offense. I think they're going to have really good years between both of them, so I don't know how to rank them. I don't know how to separate them. I think that Chris Godwin's a little better than Mike Evans. They're going into this year. At number 15, I have Julio Jones. I really like Julio Jones, and especially when he's coming into a Tennessee offense that's been very good passing the ball, and he's getting a bunch of the targets that Johnny Smith had last year and Corey Davis and guys that they don't have anymore. I do think that Julio Jones, as long as he stays healthy, knock on wood, I think that he's going to have a really good year this year. And he's going to take away a lot of double teams from what A.J. Brown is dealing with. And so I do think that Julio Jones coming into an offense that's already pretty established, that likes to run the ball a lot. I think Julio Jones is just going to make that offense even better, and I think that's going to really help Ryan Tannehill this year in fantasy terms. But I do extremely think that they are going to be oh, sorry, I said that really wrong. I expect them to be an extremely run-heavy offense still, but I think that they're going to be more efficient, though, and Derrick Henry probably won't get as many carries as he had the last 3 years, or 2 years, and so I do think that they're going to throw the ball a little bit more, and it's a really good thing that they picked up Julio, or that they traded for Julio Jones, and A.J. Brown, I think, is just a stud in himself. And I have Julio Jones ranked 15th because I think he's still a top 15 wide receiver in football. And I think that in fantasy terms, I think Julio Jones is a little bit underrated because he doesn't score touchdowns. But he does so many other things well that I think Julio Jones in fantasy is going to be really good with this Tennessee offense. So Fantasy Pros also has Julio Jones ranked 16th. I have him ranked 15th. I was just talking about him. At number 16, I have Robert Woods. I'm really high on Robert Woods. Most people are not because they think that Cooper Kupp is a huge touchdown guy. I think that Robert Woods' value doesn't even have to come through touchdowns. He's been very consistent, and maybe Cooper Kupp has a higher ceiling, but Robert Woods, we don't know what he's like with a really great quarterback because in his career, I mean, Jared Goff's fine. I don't know if he's Matthew Stafford level, though. And that's the thing is maybe that McVay's going to switch up his offense and maybe Robert Woods is going to be more of a touchdown guy. We don't know. And that's the point is I have them ranked very close to each other, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. And so I do think that they're both going to be really good in this offense, especially with Matthew Stafford there. But I have Robert Woods ranked 16th. I think he's a really solid wide receiver 2 on a team, on your fantasy team. And so I think that he's got elite upside, though, where he could potentially reach close to the wide receiver 1 status, but I don't think he ever will get there. But as a wide receiver 13 on the team or 14 on the season kind of thing, I think it's really solid. And I have him at number 16, but I think his ceiling could be really high. We don't really know what he's going to be like with Matthew Stafford, though, and that's the problem. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe if you're new. I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Peace.